Have you ever heard that saying, it's all in your head?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, back in 1861, this French doctor named Paul Broca, he found this specific area in the brain, and when it's damaged,
Hmm.
people have trouble speaking. And it's wild to think that something so important to being human
Right.
is tied to this one little spot in the brain.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we get into all the fascinating research, and
Yeah.
today we're diving into the history of psychology.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Like all those key moments and discoveries that shaped how we understand the mind.
I'm excited.
Me too.
I think this will give people a really good grasp on like the foundations of the field.
Totally. And we've got this awesome timeline
Yes.
that covers all these pivotal points, from the connections between the brain and our abilities to how different schools of thought emerged.
It's like we're tracing a river back to its source.
Exactly.
Like, where did it all begin?
And we're going to see how different perspectives clashed and how some of the core ideas took shape.
I think one of the coolest things is seeing how stuff from way back then
Oh, yeah.
still influences the field today.
So much. Yeah. Okay. Well, we already touched on Broca's area in 1861.
Right.
But just a bit later in 1874, another scientist, Carl Wernicke, he found a different area.
Okay.
This time, it was the back part of the left side of the brain,
Uh-huh.
and damage there didn't stop people from speaking,
Oh, interesting.
but it messed with their ability to understand language.
Wow.
So they could talk, but it wouldn't make much sense,
Hmm.
and they couldn't understand what other people were saying.
So like the words would come out, but the meaning was all jumbled?
Exactly. And this was huge because it really started to show that the brain is like this specialized machine.
With different parts doing different jobs.
And, up until then, psychology was really seen as a part of philosophy.
Right.
But Broca and Wernicke, they brought in this biological evidence connecting brain regions to specific mental abilities.
What was a huge shift to a more scientific approach?
Yeah, totally. Now, just a few years later, in 1869, we have Charles Darwin's cousin,
Oh, okay.
Francis Galton,
I've heard of him.
and he publishes this book arguing that genius and intelligence were inherited.
Interesting.
And then get this, in 1876, he's the one who coined the phrase nature and nurture.
Wow, so that debate has been going on for a long time.
Right from the beginning.
It's amazing how he set the stage for this central question in psychology.
Right. Like, are we more shaped by what we're born with or by our experiences in the environment?
Yeah, and even though we understand things way more nuanced now, like how nature and nurture interact in complex ways.
Yeah, it's not so black and white.
His initial framing of the question was so influential.
So influential. Okay, so let's jump ahead to 1896.
Okay.
John Dewey publishes something called Reflex Arc Concept in Psychology.
Interesting.
And this was a bit of a turning point because instead of breaking the mind down into its basic parts,
Right, like the structuralists were doing?
yeah, Dewey and the functionalists, they wanted to understand the purpose of mental processes.
Like, what do our thoughts and feelings do for us in the real world?
Exactly. Like, how do they help us adapt and survive? This is a huge shift.
Yeah, it's like instead of just looking at the individual bricks of a house, you're asking, what is the house for?
Right.
What's its function?
And around the same time, Edward Thorndike was doing those famous experiments with cats in puzzle boxes.
Oh, yeah, in 1898.
He watched them learn to escape, and in 1905, he comes up with the law of effect.
Which basically means that behaviors with positive consequences are more likely to be repeated.
And the ones with negative consequences, less likely.
Uh,
I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's this really basic principle behind how we learn.
It's like a cornerstone of behaviorism.
The idea that our behavior is shaped by those consequences.
Okay, and those experiments were so clever.
Yeah.
Because he could study learning in this really objective way.
And then in 1900,
Okay.
Freud publishes The Interpretation of Dreams.
Huge moment for psychology.
And this is really the start of psychoanalysis.
Right, which emphasized the unconscious mind.
Yeah, all those thoughts and feelings we're not even aware of.
And how they influence our behavior.
It was a totally different way of thinking about the mind.
Oh, yeah. Freud's impact is undeniable.
Definitely.
Even though some of his theories have been challenged over time,
Right.
he changed how we view the human mind.
By showing that so much is happening beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And he really highlighted the importance of early childhood experiences.
And how those can shape us as adults.
Now, in 1901, the British Psychological Society is founded.
Okay.
And this is a big step towards psychology becoming a recognized profession.
Like a real scientific discipline.
Yeah, exactly. Those organizations are so important for any field that wants to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. They set standards for training and practice, promote collaboration among researchers,
and help communicate the field's work to the public.
It's a sign of maturity for a field.
And then to round out this early period, we have Ivan Pavlov winning the Nobel Prize in 1904.
And he was a physiologist, right?
He was studying digestion in dogs.
Right. But he's so closely linked to psychology.
Well, because while studying those dogs, he stumbled upon classical conditioning.
The whole idea that you can learn to associate two unrelated things.
And it wasn't even what he was originally researching.
It's amazing how scientific discoveries can happen that way.
It's like a happy accident.
Totally. And the fact that he won a Nobel Prize for work on digestion just shows how influential his findings were for psychology.
Okay, so now we move into the mid-20th century.
Okay.
And in 1946, Benjamin Spock's The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care comes out.
Oh, yeah, that was huge.
He was hugely influential on parenting practices for generations.
It was like psychology going mainstream.
Right out of the lab and into people's homes.
It showed how psychology could be applied to everyday life.
Totally. Now, in 1948, Alfred Kinsey and his team published their first report on human sexual behavior.
The one focused on men.
And then the one on women came out in 1953.
Those were groundbreaking studies.
They brought this scientific lens to a topic that was super taboo back then.
Yeah, they really challenged societal norms.
And despite all the controversy, Kinsey's meticulous data collection provided valuable insights into human sexuality.
It really paved the way for more open discussions and future research.
Absolutely. Now, that same year, B.F. Skinner, a big name in behaviorism, publishes his novel, Walden 2.
It was about this utopian community.
Right, and everything was based on principles of positive reinforcement.
That was a pretty radical idea.
Yeah, like you could engineer a whole society using psychology.
I mean, the ethical implications are complicated.
For sure.
But it started conversations about the power of psychology to create change.
And for students studying psychology at the time, Ernest Hilgard's Theories of Learning, which came out in 48, became a major textbook.
It was considered the standard for so long.
It really highlights how central the study of learning is to psychology.
Totally. Understanding how we learn is fundamental to understanding behavior.
Okay, so then in 1949, Raymond Cattell introduced the 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire, or 16PF.
Right, an early attempt to systematically measure personality.
Yeah, to categorize different traits in a more scientific way.
It was part of this larger trend towards more empirical and measurable approaches in psychology.
And that same year, the Boulder Conference took place.
And they came up with the scientist-practitioner model for clinical psychology.
Which is still the dominant model today.
Right. It means that clinical psychologists need to be skilled in both research and practice.
So they can do therapy, but also understand and conduct research.
It ensures that clinical work is based on scientific evidence.
And that research is addressing real-world clinical problems.
Now, also in 49, a Canadian psychologist, Donald Hebb, published The Organization of Behavior.
And it was a really influential book.
It connected what's happening in the brain to behavior and mental processes.
Exactly. He suggested that things like learning and memory could be understood by looking at those neural networks in the brain.
It was a huge step in linking biology and psychology.
Moving into the 1960s, we have Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer's research on learned helplessness.
Oh, yes, in 1967.
They did these experiments with dogs.
Yeah.
And they found that when the dogs were repeatedly exposed to something they couldn't control,
right,
they would eventually just give up.
Even when they could escape.
Exactly. And this was a really powerful concept for understanding depression.
And that feeling of powerlessness.
In 1968, Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin came up with their three-stage model of memory.
Oh, yeah, with sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory.
It was a really useful framework
for understanding how we process and store information.
That same year, Neil Miller's research on instrumental conditioning led to the development of biofeedback.
Right, he showed that people could learn to control things like their heart rate,
which we usually think of as automatic.
It was groundbreaking because it challenged the idea that those functions were totally outside our control.
Then in 1969, Albert Bandura published Principles of Behavior Modification,
which emphasized the social context of learning.
Yeah, he talked about observational learning.
Right, like learning by watching others.
And how social factors shape our behavior.
And it was in 1969 that George Miller gave that famous Give Psychology Away speech, encouraging psychologists to make their findings more accessible to the public.
He really wanted to make psychology relevant and useful in the real world.
Now let's move into the later part of the 20th century and the early 21st century.
Okay, sounds good.
In 1971, the Asian American Psychological Association is founded.
Which reflects a growing awareness of diversity within the field.
Exactly, and recognizing how culture can influence our experiences.
In 1973, three ethologists, Karl von Frisch, Konrad Lorenz, and Nicholas Tinbergen, win the Nobel Prize.
For their work on animal behavior.
And this brought evolutionary perspectives into psychology.
Yeah, highlighting how our behavior has been shaped by evolution.
And the study of behavior in natural settings.
Okay then, in 1974, the Teaching of Psychology journal is launched.
Which shows a dedication to improving psychology education.
It's absolutely...
That same year, Eleanor McCoby and Carol Jacklin published The Psychology of Sex Differences.
Right, they reviewed tons of research to try and figure out the real differences between men and women.
And separate that from societal stereotypes.
It sparked a lot more research into the complex interplay of biology and social factors.
Now, in 1975, E.O. Wilson publishes Sociobiology.
Which argued for a strong biological basis for social behavior.
Yeah, even in humans. It was a pretty controversial book.
It definitely stirred up the nature versus nurture debate.
But it laid the groundwork for evolutionary psychology.
Which is still a major perspective today.
Okay, then. In 1976, Sandra Scar and Richard Weinberg published a study on the IQ scores of Black children adopted by white families.
Right, it was a complex study.
Trying to disentangle the effects of genetics and environment.
And how those relate to intelligence and race.
And that same year, Robert Guthrie publishes Even the Rat Was White.
Right, the first history of African-American psychologists in America.
Highlighting those important contributions that were often overlooked.
It was a major step towards a more inclusive understanding of the field's history.
Then in 1978, Herbert Simon wins a Nobel Prize.
For his work on computer simulations of human thinking.
Which really solidified the cognitive revolution.
Yeah, the idea of the mind as an information processor.
In 1979, James Gibson publishes the Ecological Approach to Visual Perception.
Right, emphasizing how our visual system is designed to pick up information directly from the environment.
Rather than building a mental representation from scratch.
It was a very different way of thinking about perception.
Fast forwarding to 2013, President Obama launches a big initiative to fund brain research.
The Brain Initiative.
Exactly, and it really shows this ongoing interest in understanding the biological basis of behavior.
Using all those cutting-edge neuroscience techniques.
And finally, in 2015, there was that independent review of the APA's ethics guidelines.
Right, in the context of those national security interrogations.
A really important event that highlighted the ethical considerations in psychology.
Especially when it's applied in those sensitive, real-world situations.
Now, the textbook that we've been using for this deep dive is Psychology by Myers and DeWall.
It's in its 12th edition now.
And it's designed to be a comprehensive and engaging introduction to the field.
Yeah, David Myers has tons of experience teaching intro psych.
And Nathan DeWall is a social psychologist.
So they bring a lot of expertise to the table.
And as we've seen, there are some big themes that run through the history of psychology.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The nature versus nurture debate.
Which is still ongoing.
And the importance of looking at behavior from different levels. Biological, psychological, and social, cultural.
It's the biopsychosocial approach.
Right, recognizing that all those levels interact to shape who we are.
And we've seen different schools of thought rise and fall.
Like structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, psychoanalysis, humanistic psychology, cognitive psychology, and evolutionary psychology.
Each one offering a different perspective on the human experience.
And at the heart of it all is the scientific method.
Using research methods like case studies, observations, surveys, and experiments.
And always thinking critically about those research findings.
That's what makes psychology a science.
So as we wrap up, what are your big takeaways from this deep dive into the history of psychology?
Well, I think the main thing is that psychology is always evolving. It has this rich and fascinating history full of different thinkers and researchers.
Trying to answer those fundamental questions about who we are.
And why we do the things we do.
And how do you think knowing this history can help our listeners understand psychology today?
I think it gives you a deeper appreciation for the current state of the field.
Right.
Like so many of the questions those early pioneers were asking
Yeah.
are still relevant today.
But now we have more tools and knowledge to address them.
Exactly. And I think for the listener, understanding those foundational ideas can help you make sense of different approaches to things like mental health, learning, and personal growth.
It can give you a framework.
Maybe encourage you to be more critical of the psychological information you encounter.
That's such a good point.
It helps you to see where it all came from.
So after this whole journey through the early years and development of psychology, what do you think has had the most profound and lasting impact on how we understand ourselves today?
I think it's that shift towards a more scientific approach.
Oh, interesting.
Like starting with Broca and Wernicke's discoveries about the brain,
Okay.
it really moved psychology away from pure philosophy and speculation.
Right.
And it laid the foundation for all the rigorous research that came after.
Yeah, making psychology the science it is today.
Exactly. And that emphasis on scientific evidence has shaped how we approach everything from mental health to learning to social behavior.
I think that's a great point to end on. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the fascinating history of psychology.
It's been a pleasure.
Make sure to check out our show notes for more information on all the people and studies we talked about today. And until next time, keep on learning.
And keep on exploring.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.